He's impervious to our weapons.
He has not yet felt the force of the elements!
See, we look at these things like acceptance and tolerance, and we don't realize how degrading it is. You're already putting yourself in a pedestal above another human being, and we are supposed to be equal.
Beware my power! Green Lantern's light!
Hello, hi, and how are you? I am Dr. Khalid Nas, and this is Referential. Referential is my podcast where we can have some serious conversations about frivolous things. If you're looking for a bit more of an explainer, please just scroll up to the first episode in this feed. It's short, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. In the meantime, let's just get into it. This is episode 1, Black and Power. Let's go! Okay, question. If you could wake up tomorrow and have any superpower, what superpower would you have? I've asked a lot of people that question because I am a big comic book nerd, but the most common answer that I've gotten is definitely not telepathy, which I do get, I really do. I have an image of Jean Grey crouching under the thoughts of everybody around her in my mind, but I don't know. A lot of my favorite characters are telepaths. Okay, so let's just double back. If you don't know, telepathy is the power to read people's minds or change their thoughts or to communicate with just your mind. We are talking big name characters like Professor X or Martian Manhunter or Jean Grey. Okay, so I said all of that because a few years ago, I started writing an essay that I never got around to finishing, and the basic premise of it was to answer a question that gets kicked around a lot by fans. That question being, where are the black telepaths? Let's actually chew on that one a little bit. Where are the black telepaths? Looking at my notes, I started by thinking about telepathy itself, the power. In media, from The Shining to the X-Men. Okay, so here's the argument. From the way that telepathy shows up in pop culture, you see telepathy almost giving access to the depths of humanity. I mean, think about it. A telepath can walk through memories. They can see someone completely from their best to their worst. A character with the gift of telepathy is afforded knowledge, which lends itself to access, and that lends itself to power. A kind of insidious societal power. They will always know who they're in the room with and what they're thinking and what they've done and what they might do. I don't think you really have to stretch that hard to relate them to ideas about the voyeur. And of course, with all the associations that you can make about the voyeur and the male gaze, you could see why, in that context, someone who is writing a telepath or drawing a telepath would draw someone who looks like Professor Xavier. Because in our real world, people with power and access and control, well, they tend to look like Professor Xavier. Okay, so in that framework, I am encoding this idea of patriarchal whiteness in relation to telepathy. But there are characters who don't fit in neatly within that framework. Characters like Jean Grey and Emma Frost. Now, those characters both have a long and complicated and inconsistent history, but a lot has been written about the way in which their development has been impacted by things like the male gaze, male authorship, and the Madonna-whore binary. So maybe they were afforded access to that power position of being a telepath because the story was about white masculinity being in crisis. You know, the way that white masculinity is always in crisis. Plus, their position as white women helped not displace the power dynamics too much because the systematic patriarchy is convinced that it can always conquer women. But also because idealizing white women is one of the main tenets of that system, and in that there is a benefit, or a privilege at least. So, it's been easier to imagine a white woman character being a telepath than it would have been to imagine a black character, let alone a black woman. I mean, imagine if Professor X was written to look like Jude Jordan for the very first issue. How much would have the trajectory of that story changed? But there is another angle we can attack this from. So, let's go back to Emma and Jean for a second. Both of them have one thing in common, and that is that they are privileged white women. And if we expand beyond them, we can see that this is another trend amongst characters who are telepathic. They are characters of wealth. They are privileged. That actually maps on as well to the few characters of color who happen to be telepathic. So, Monet, Karma, Astrid, I guess. So again, let's go back to the earlier point about telepathy as access. It is a signifier of wealth. It is a signifier of capitalism, aristocracy. Telepathy as a signifier of class and caste. A means of categorization made to exclude black people until very recently. Kind of. Maybe. So again, we find ourselves with barely any black telepaths. And then there's the practical aspect, which somehow annoys me the most. People like to imagine people who look like them. So the side characters don't get the big old flashy power. And if you are black, you're probably still on the side of the story. Or we could be more generous. A lot of these stories tend to be about telepathy bringing trauma, and we're all very, very tired of seeing black characters experience trauma. But that's if you want to be generous. I started thinking about that unfinished essay while editing the conversation that you're about to hear. My guest this episode is the always lovely Ash Alleyne. He is the brain and the host behind the Immortal X of Words podcast. You'll hear a bit more about that in the episode. We talk about being super black, aka how empowered blackness is represented in fantasy and superhero and other general nerd media. We go in deep about a lot of the topics that I only just started touching on in that intro. Topics like authorship, how blackness is included or excluded from narratives about empowerment. And also importantly, we talk about what is good and what is bad representation, and just what quote-unquote good or bad representation means in the grand scheme of things. But before all that, like two good Brits, we have to start the conversation with a talk about the weather. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll catch you back here in Citation Corner after you've listened in. Okay. Goodbye.
But hey, it's okay. It's all right. The weather's been nice, which is good. My next
See, I've been dying because of the weather. I can't handle it. I can't.
Really?
I don't like the heat. I hate the heat.
What?
I hate the heat, which I know. I grew up in a hot climate and all that, but that is the reason why I hate the heat, because so I grew up and it would regularly hit 40 degrees and it was a small island,
Yeah.
so it would be really humid. So it would be the kind of thing
Mm.
where the air is heavy. It's kind of what this heat wave has reminded me of. It's been too much. It's been too much for me. I can't do it. So I've been hiding out. The other day, I finally like relented and I spent 50 pounds on an air cooler, and I don't regret a single decision. I felt very posh carrying it on the shit. I was really mortified.
Oh, look at this. Look at this. Classism.
How's it classism? I just wanted an air cooler.
They got you wrong.
I know they did get me. At this point, I have an air fryer and I have an air
Oh,
cooler.
no, air fryers. Air
You're the
fryers.
shit.
Let me tell you something.
Well,
Ooh,
tell me. Give me an ode.
somebody needs something sucked from the back.
I hate
Coming up
that.
with that. Look, I didn't say anything. This is a classy place, you know. I didn't say any of the words, but I have given you the broad idea.
You did warn me that you're gonna get unfiltered on my pod, didn't you?
This ain't
Is
my
this,
house.
is this how it begins? Is this how it begins, Phil? You're a
Yeah.
respectable peer. Before you were an idol to me, and like, look at you now, just like a
Fuck your
whole
couch.
seat.
Fuck your couch.
I have a lovely couch. Don't come from my couch.
It was a lie, Your Honor.
Hey, this is from Habitat. Why are you attacking my home? I invite you into it. I offer you tea. I've always been nice to you. I've always been decent to you, and then
It
you
is
come at
a
me, Jimmy, with
lovely
that fast
couch.
mouth.
It
Thank you.
is a lovely couch. It is a lovely
Thank you.
couch.
Don't you ever? Don't talk about my couch. Don't you talk about my couch. You can come from my family. You can come from my mother. You can, you can come from my partner, but you do not come from my couch. That's not okay. I live here.
But I came home and because you were talking about stats, and I came back in and I realized that I will probably never tell them that they were the reason that a 20-year friendship of mine ended. And now I'm obsessed with knowing like my shadow stats.
Okay.
Because they don't know. They're sitting at home. They just ended casually without any knowledge or involvement. They were the central theme of the end of one of my closest friendships. And like now I'm like, I wonder who I've broken up. Like where? What are my shadow stats? Like, how many couples have I broken up? Was I walking down the street and someone's head turned and they went, "How dare you?" And then that was it. The marriage was off.
I think as a queer person living in the United Kingdom, I think you need to be very careful about this train of thought that you were walking down. I know I've broken up a marriage. I know that for sure. I just don't want to engage with that in my day-to-day life. You know?
Yeah, I just choose to know nothing more about it. That's all.
Exactly. That is the agreement we made that night, and I'm a lover who keeps to my vows.
Not you tapping me on the shoulder, be like, "Bitch, you know you're looking for extra accountability."
Oh, but speaking of problematic blacks, that isn't me. Have you heard the Have you heard the Richard Ayoade news?
I haven't. I've been staying away from him.
Okay, tell me why.
I feel like he was always annoying. We just decided we liked it. I don't know. Like, he was always just a bit odd. And people were like, "Oh, wait, I find this charming." And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. And now,
Well, he just came out as transphobic, so that's lovely.
what did he say? Oh, Jesus.
He said something about Graham Linham. I don't know how to say his last name.
Oh, Grey who's destroyed his entire family and reputation. And his wife divorced him, and now he just sits on Twitter being angry and ugly. Excellent. Well, now I get to say the shit that I couldn't say before. That nigga got
Let it
crispy
out.
afro. That nigga got crispy afro. Yeah? And
And
there's
actually,
something in the hair.
Ennies, I saw him.
Yeah, I know you don't cream. I can feel how dry your heel is from over here.
Thank you. And I could tell he stink. He stink in that white way where they smell like milk. Yep. Okay. Yep. You hear me. You feel me. They do sometimes. Not all of them. Some of them.
He looked like if you nodded, he wouldn't know what to do. He wouldn't know what that was. He feels like one of the people where if you go to speak to him in a room full of white people, you go, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
glad you're here." He goes, "Why?"
If you nodded, he would give you a number for his great chiropractor.
Not even, because I probably wouldn't even get that close. Because you know what? There's something about black conservatives. You can always tell by the hair.
Yeah, actually, that's a really great point. You can.
You can always tell by the hair. I think the hair is like the litmus test. You know where your skin is the last thing in your body to get like nutrients. I
Right.
think the hair is the first thing to atrophy when your cultural connection is off.
But no, the thing is about Richard Ayoade is that I don't know what we expected from a guy who sold himself as British Carlton. Like, yeah, that's who he is. He told us
Yeah,
from day one.
yeah.
And I do appreciate people who just say it with their chest. Like, okay, great, I know exactly how to feel about you. I wish more people would do that instead of hedging their bets, even though like trying to hide their views from the world and just letting it out in private. Say it. Say it. Is that, I don't know. Is that just me?
And also, no, people need to know also when they've got like either way face.
Tell me more.
Like maybe I think the last couple of years might have gassed him up. Because I think if people think that you're idiosyncratic and a little bit quirky, either way face means that you could be a little bit cute or very ugly, depending on what your attitude is.
Okay.
Like, not me though. I'll be mean as hell and still fine. But Richard...
I was gonna say this conversation is starting to feel a bit pointed, but go on.
Not hit dogs hollering. I didn't say a word. I did not say a word, and you dragged the muzzle right into your chest. You grabbed that shotgun and pointed it at yourself, and I was like, "This was not meant for you." I'm gonna regret everything I say here today.
No, you'll be all right.
But yeah, no, now because as soon as you said that, I went and I clicked on his name and I went and searched him, and he just looks horrible in every photo. And it's because I know now what stinking thoughts you have.
No, I think you completely made the point. There's certain people who have gotten away with just being head asses for a really long time because of their quirk. And I'm glad we're at least starting to reach a point where we have our certain things that are a bit of a line in the sand, for some of us anyway, which I guess is
Yeah,
fine.
and all things aside, I mean, I think I at least am being very sort of free and hyperbolic and silly, and I don't want the end of this conversation because sometimes when you talk, you have to look at like the logical end of any premise or idea you're setting up, and that the logical end of this is I can judge weirdness by how you look, or I can judge transphobia, and that horrible sort of association between morality and beauty.
Yeah.
I feel like we're joking around that point, but I also want to make it really clear that we're doing it knowingly and ironically, and we are not
Hmm.
seriously associating fucked up bigotry and prejudiced views with an ill-kempt afro.
That's a great point, and yes, underline that. But I will say that something in what I said. No, but no, genuinely.
Great
No,
point.
think of it.
But he do be looking creepy though.
She ugly though. No, butterface. No, that's not what I was going to say. That is not what I was going to
Okay,
say. What I was
okay.
going to say was that it's something that I said. I called him Black Carlton, and that for
Yeah.
me was a way in which I was measuring his blackness, which I think is something in
Yeah.
the stew, which is a conversation that's worth having. That his claim to, well, not even his claims to blackness, but like, how do we feel about him as a prominent black face in British media being horrible? I'm not taking responsibility for him. That's
Ah.
for one.
Can I be honest? I never once saw him as a prominent blackface.
Okay.
So for me to see somebody as a prominent black anything, they need to be publicly in their media or in their relations with press, be
Okay.
advocating and owning that blackness. Richard Ayoade has never done that. The blackest thing about Richard Ayoade is his surname. It's
Yeah.
not even
Yeah.
that. It's not even that I've seen him actively try to distance it. It's just that I've never seen him in anything I've ever seen him in the years he's been famous. And I watched the IT Crowd, and I watched that documentary that he did, and I watched this and stuff. I've never seen him even passingly reference his own
Mhm.
blackness. But then obviously, it's not like I'm a fucking stan. So
No. I think you're positioned in an interesting way as a casual, not even fan, as a casual person that's encountered his work. I agree with you. His work doesn't really often or at all engage with blackness, but he is a person who presents as black and will be understood as black by the majority of the public. Can we say that?
mhm, mhm,
Right?
mhm.
And so he is part of a legacy of blackness, unfortunately. You're
Oof.
cringing. How do we settle with that? Which I think is an interesting question given the topic that we're talking about, because questions of trying to understand and relate to and interpret the blackness that we're presented with in fiction, which is what you do, specifically on your
Mm,
podcast, X of Words.
yes.
Could you actually just tell me a bit more about why you chose to do your podcast and what it is that you felt like there was a gap that you had to start addressing?
Oh, sure. I love X-Men, but I love comics and I love media. I was always like a really voracious reader, and I not only got a sense for like really, really well created characters and really rich worlds, but also regularly flexed that part of myself that had to relate to people who were fundamentally different to me.
Mm-hmm.
And X-Men was one of the few places in the, mid 90s media landscape that
Mm-hmm.
was talking explicitly about themes that I was starting to discover, and also had a mix of people in them. Because go back to 2014 and you see a marked difference in the quality and the depth of representation of anybody that wasn't a white person. Go back to
Okay.
1995,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets even worse. I kind of dipped in and out of comic books and other types of media as well, purely because as I got older and I got more exacting about what I wanted to read and put in my brain, some of that stuff fell off. And
Okay.
then Jonathan Hickman redid the whole mutant line and brought them back with far more agency and self determination. And I was brought back in again.
Okay.
And I start suddenly, all these childhood stories and the childhood characters that I loved suddenly starting to get written about in a way that adult me could engage with in good faith. So yeah, then obviously Hickman comes around, and suddenly the books are starting to make sense to me again, and I've got childhood love and adult standards both being met and combined at the same time, which is great. But then I started
Mm-hmm.
looking around for other people to be seeing the things that I was seeing in the books, and I wasn't. I was watching a lot of white dude bros screaming and lamenting about the fact that they weren't heroes anymore.
Okay.
I was like, hold on a minute, this is a mess.
You guys are in a crisis. I'm on my way.
This thing that means so much to people who aren't stood directly in front of the mic
Mm-hmm.
might not be seen or valued, or have its value appreciated by Marvel because the wrong people are stood at the mic. Having 7,000 X-Men media outlets, 99% of them run by white dudes, might be a bit of a challenge when you start writing the first stories in 40 years that aren't specifically meant to appease the sensibilities of white dudes as it pertains to marginalization. So then I was like, fuck, all right, well, you know what? I tried to make a podcast on myself. It was boring as fuck. I don't want to edit anything longer than 10 minutes. And randomly, I started talking about comics at the end of my first podcast, which was a flop called Pick a Lane, which was a great pun, bad podcast. And I started randomly talking about comics, and two people dropped into my inbox. I think it was like the second episode. The first episode, absolutely nobody listened to it. Nobody cared. Second episode, I posted it, and suddenly my inbox lit up with people in a way it had never done before. Because they were like, oh, you like comics? I loved hearing you talk about comics. And then it was basically just a thing where I started following the fun. And I was like, hold on a minute, what am I actually reading now? What do I think about it? And what do I actually enjoy? And then that's what happened. And through that, I've managed to meet so many amazing, amazing Black queer people, trans people, Black women, neurodiverse people, people who have got autism, people who are non-binary. And I've heard so many amazing views on X-Men since then. But that was the genesis.
Oh, that's a pun for those that don't know. So you read House of X, Powers of 10, and you felt like there was a level to it that you wanted to engage with sincerely because you felt like there was, say, like bad faith engagements happening by other perspectives that aren't yours, and you felt the gap of your voice in the mix. Is that sort of what you're saying, right?
Not even. It was more that I think any dominant group has become dominant by creating the circumstances socially, systemically, by which you do not have to learn about anybody that isn't you. A sort of intentional, manufactured solipsism.
Yeah.
So you can, I was speaking about this at work the other day, and I was like, you can, say if you're a white dude, you can get to the top of your field in almost every discipline there is, never knowing a damn thing about Asian people, never knowing a damn thing about disabled people or Black people or women. You don't have to know anything about those people. If you're a man, think about how many men hit adulthood and are disputing the presence of a clitoris or a G-spot, or don't know how menstruation works, or think that women don't fart. And all of this speaks to a sort of, firstly, a personal ignorance, but also a systemic privilege of not having to learn about anybody who isn't you. And so that's what I saw. I saw a bunch of people who had managed to build great platforms under themselves, but had never actually, even though they were reading something about, you know, a marginalized group, had never actually had to interrogate their relationship to that marginalized group or really learn anything about them. All they had to know was, my mum and dad told me that Martin Luther King was all about peace and being nice to me. And that means that minorities should be nice to me. And that is, and so when I saw that, I felt like I wanted to contribute to conversation, but it wasn't just like I felt like there was a miss for my voice. I thought there was a miss for loads of voices. So that's why I came up with X of Words, always having a different guest, because I didn't want to add one facet to a conversation that I think was lacking loads of facets. I wanted to create a platform where loads of different opinions and perspectives could start to weigh in and chip in on this thing.
So what I find really interesting about what you've been saying there is that there's an element of agency in what you're saying, that you kind of wanted to claim agency in the way in which you're interacting with these mediums and these medias as something other than a consumer. So it's placing yourself in engagement with it as a critic, as a fan, and also connecting with the community, which a specifically Black community, which is
empowerment. That's the title of the notes that you sent me, and I think a lot of this was about empowerment. Hickman started writing stories that empowered marginalized people, which led me to empower myself with a voice in order to defend that empowerment, if that makes sense. So in empowering the characters, he inspired me to empower myself to defend what was going on and talk about it with a level of nuance. because I think a lot of people were seeing mutant empowerment as a threat in the same way that they hadn't ever interrogated that they would have seen marginalized empowerment as a threat. And that's the seductive and dangerous thing about tolerance and false equivalence that regressive, backwards ideas of equality give you. Because if you're taught that you should pity a people because they are suffering, and if you're taught that you're a good person for doing it, that's the other thing. Tolerating black people, yeah, feeling bad for them because of all they go through makes you a good person. And once you tie pity to ego, people want to keep you in a pitiable state because they've never been taught not to fear you. So it's like, oh no, no, but they still have all the same lingering. Well, what if they had too much power? Things that all the
Right.
like, yeah. So people were really threatened by this mutant empowerment.
Yeah.
To me, you're just exposing the thoughts in your mind. So if you see a fictionalized, marginalized group get their own society and start thinking about their survival first, and you go, well, hold on a minute, this seems a bit suspicious. What are they going to do to the humans? Am I meant to think that's completely separate to the way that you imagine people?
Yeah. No, I think there's like something very important about the perspective that you add as a person orientated as you are, and also the guests that you bring on. I'm imagining like if without you, without the voices that I became accustomed to through listening to your podcast, through being connected to that community, how would I have received, say, the Arako storyline in the X-Men, for example? How would I have delved into that more deeply when really what I gleaned from it and what I've learned from it came from that community? I was reading a book by Andre M. Carrington, who really spent a lot of time talking about Black fandom and the
Yeah.
significance of Black fandom in sci fi and fantasy and fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, we were talking about this idea of reading against the grain, which is reading not necessarily while ignoring authorial intent, but trying to take from it what you can and see what that symbolizes. And I find that that is something that you and your podcast engage with quite a bit. And that's kind of why I wanted to specifically have you on, because I'm really interested in your ideas of what is the state of Black representation in media today.
Oh. Ooh.
No, what do you think of the state of Black representation? Because now Miles has been here for a couple of years. We have gone
Yes.
past the point where we are introducing Luke Cage on Netflix and talking about him being the bulletproof man and the significance of that.
Think about where you are. It's hollow ground. This park, named for Jackie Robinson. It's here. It's all around you. If you respect yourself enough to take a look. At what? Our legacy.
We're a few
Yeah.
years down that. And that's not to say that we've progressed about that, but like what we are able to start to see what has came out of that. And are we better off? Is the Black superhero
Yes.
better now than he was 10 years ago or she was 10 years ago?
Yes. Yes.
Why?
Yes. 100%. I think Black representation has gotten more diverse and more varied.
Okay.
And so there is less pressure on the representation we do have to do all things.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this the other day actually, because I was talking about anti stereotype heroes. So I see Black Panther as a character that was created to stand in direct opposition to all of the racist
Right.
stereotypical hits at the time. So black people were dumb, he's super smart. Black people were poor, he's super rich. Black people come from destroyed countries with flies and mud huts. Black Panther comes from the
He
most
knows his ancestry.
technologically, yeah, he knows his ancestry, and he comes from one of the most technologically forward places in the world, and da 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 da. This is the challenging thing, because there are characters that are Black Panther esque, like Iron Man.
Okay.
Iron Man has a similar suite. What Iron Man doesn't do is stand in a black stage. He doesn't stand in a black context. Whereas Tony has almost hit for hit a lot of the same quality, skills, and aptitudes and resources. He is not being judged as representative of blackness. So,
I think that this reminds me when you were describing all the things that T'Challa is. I was reading something where it was talking about T'Challa is a vision of Black futurism or the Black excellence or, Black potential untouched by American slavery,
100%.
which I think is kind of what you were saying. It's interesting, like that is the thing that not just accessorizes him or anything like that, but also that pushes him to the position that he is, a position where we were a couple years ago all doing Wakanda Forever salute, that we felt deeply connected to this history, that we had these tendrils to identify with. But it
Yeah,
also, I think, comes with a huge responsibility because as you were talking about Iron Man being almost a character that's very similar to T'Challa, he doesn't have that burden of representing a whole community of people, which complicates this idea that you have of T'Challa as the anti-stereotype hero, because in many ways he is trading with those stereotypes, but maybe transforming them.
exactly. I think he transforms them, but that comes with time. So I'll lean back on what you said about reading against the grain. And I think,
Yeah.
yes, T'Challa was created as a vision of blackness that had not been touched by colonialism and basically white influence, overt white influence.
Hmm.
He's also the antithesis of all the common stereotypes. Now, I know that is easy to do because if there's one thing white people love, is demonizing blackness. So almost everything, if you dig deep enough, is the antithesis of some
Yeah.
sort of black stereotype because
Yeah.
we've been everything under the fucking sun. So it's not hard also to draw parallels and go, you're the opposite of all the black stereotypes. There's literally 7,000 of them.
That is true. That is true.
So I do take into account, like, there's a pinch of salt there, which is it's not hard to draw relief from literally something that is everywhere and ever present. But also, he was one of very few. And
Yeah.
I think
He was the first.
he was one of very, very few
Mm.
positive representations of blackness, which means in my mind you have to carry more weight. It's like table legs. The more there are of you is the less weight each individual leg has to carry. If there's only 3 legs, then a lot is being concentrated through those people. And that's why I say I think we're better off now because we have a suite of different characters. I can name more black characters now everywhere than I ever could
Okay.
before. And so I was watching Aquaman, the Aquaman
Yeah, the trailer.
today. Yeah, the trailer just dropped.
Yeah.
So I was watching that and I was like, we're back again. I was thinking, oh, look, we're back to niggas is bad as a trope. It is. And it used to, it realized, no, because I watched the trailer and I was like, I get it. So the only thing that should make you break out your Aryan genocidal brother is because there's a nigger here and he's objectively worse. Everybody can make up. As soon as there's a black man to kill, everybody's back in the boat. We're mobilizing. And I was like, oh, okay.
I don't
Because
want to see another black man dead in the ocean. Enough is enough. I've had it. That feels triggering, and I rebuke it.
That was the thing is that I watched it and it didn't feel triggering, and it didn't feel triggering
Mm,
because we have a breadth of black representation now, and so I have much more space for, and I can hold much more space for black antagonists because you
mhm,
aren't you aren't everything. I mean, when I was young, it was a phrase I used to have for media. And I used to say that when it came to TV films and this and that, we were niggers or we were nothing. If
mm.
we couldn't be portrayed as the sum of the worst thoughts about us, then we just
Yeah.
weren't present. If there wasn't a drug dealer to be, if there wasn't violence to be meted out, if there wasn't somebody to be lashed and subjugated, then we just weren't present. Like
Mm,
human affection, success, joy, thriving, complication, being troubled and still being loved and redeemable was not for us. Like today, I just got finished watching Edge of Tomorrow, which
mm.
is a
I've
film
never seen
with,
that.
it's actually a really solid action sci-fi film. Kind of
Okay,
good.
I'll check it out.
Kind of good.
Okay.
Tom Cruise. It's like he's doing all
You
of
lost
the
me. You lost
no
me
no
there.
no 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 no. He's doing all of the spy shit, but actually in an interesting premise.
Okay. All
So
right. Hey,
yeah,
it's a first.
when Tom Cruise is being stiff and boring, there's other interesting things to pay attention to.
Well, hello. Let's celebrate that.
There we go. Christmas for everybody.
Oh God. Okay. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted. Go on.
But in that, we get a fraudulent white military man who only gets into the military. He used to run an ad agency and then joined
Hmm.
the military because he can basically help bullshit people, and they needed somebody who could bullshit people into
Yeah.
convincing them that the war effort was actually going well. And I watched it and I was like, this whole film is about how even the worst white men can be redeemed. And he
Mm.
literally gets the premise of the film is that he kills an alien and it gives him time looping ability. So every time he dies, he goes back to the start of the day and he keeps having to relive this day again and again and again while trying to stop an alien invasion.
Yeah.
But the whole film is just white redemption writ large.
Right.
We will give you endless days to learn how to not be such a coward or a jackass, or learn how to respect women, or learn how to do this and da 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 da. And I was like, I never saw black characters given that grace.
Mm. Have we seen a black character that has been able to earn redemption?
I would say Oya. I
Okay.
would say Issa Rae. I would say everybody in Insecure.
You know, that's really interesting. I actually was thinking a lot about Insecure over the past couple of days when I was thinking about the idea, just in general, of empowered blackness, taking that away from superheroics and fantasy and fiction, and the way
Yeah,
that we deal with it in our everyday, day to day life. So, thinking about it in relation to black excellence, respectability, the bootstrap sort of politics,
exactly.
obviously. But even all that aside, I started thinking about Issa Rae, awkward black girl, Insecure, because of the way they disrupted that, because it was about showcasing an almost hyper close sensitive portrayal of like human existence, not just human existence, black femme
She
human
raised a
existence.
spear
Yes.
against her own husband for Wakanda.
Where is her treacherous husband now? But in a place where she can visit if she wished. Mine! It's with the ancestors! I am queen of the most powerful nation in the world, and my entire family is gone! Have I not given everything?
There is a lot of power in that. There's a lot of relatability in that. But I think it's interesting the way in which we have women characters do that.
Yeah.
And we have male characters or men presenting characters be more so standing for this image of solidness, of impenetrability. Obviously, my mind's going to Luke Cage and Black Lightning. But even beyond that, if I think of every single character that Denzel Washington has been and continues to be, it's playing with this idea of being the unconquered hero. The idea of the black masculinity, obviously, that's seeping in there. There's like an interesting distinction in the way we have gendered our understanding of what is powerful from gendered black people in media.
You said a couple of things there that I really
Go on.
liked. There was this thing that I heard that I can't remember where I heard it, so sorry if I'm not shouting out somebody who needs to be shouted out here. But they said that the true mark of equality is when we get black mediocrity
Right.
and excellence.
Hi.
Black excellence.
Hi, my name is Dr. Khalid Nas. Welcome to Referential.
I thought you were gonna say your name was Black Mediocrity. I was about to fall off the fucking chair.
I would never cop to that.
I was about to
Go
lay
on.
down dead, bitch.
Go on.
But yeah,
Black
so
mediocrity.
but I think that's it. And mediocrity, I think, is maybe a little bit of a misnomer here. But I'm talking about like black redemption, black flaws, black nuance, black fear,
Neutrality.
black weakness, black all of these things. And I think that, and when you were talking about black masculinity, I wrote black masculinity is regular masculinity with a better enemy, and that's it. It's like. But it is. It's exactly the same settings. It's like white men are running iOS 7 and black men are running iOS 8. Like there's features. It's like, oh, all of that same shit, except we stand against racism. And a lot of it has the same fucked up tenets. So yes, you do get those same single stoic characters because masculinity is telling you to divorce yourself from your emotions. It's telling you to amputate the sensitive parts of yourself, the parts of yourself that readily connects with other people. It's heroing and championing a sort of cauterization of the self. And for black masculinity, at least the black masculinity that I've always been exposed to and have consumed through the world and its media, the reason for that cauterization changes. Not necessarily because you're a man, but because you're a man who has to stand in this world against racism and you have to protect your black woman and your family and da 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 da. And I think I think there's healthy things like in anything, and like in sort of masculinity writ large, there are healthy things to pull from it. But it does tend to commodify other people and hierarch other people and grade and rank other people in the very traditional, stereotypical masculine. But also, I think like with black representation, the mediocrity thing, I'll spin back to around to it again, because now I feel like we have that broadness that allows me to watch a black villain or a black antagonist and not think this is 77% of the black representation this year, because he's not. And for the first time in my life, say if I don't want to see a black man who is, rallied against by an entire set of kingdoms, I can go and watch 7 or 8 other black shows. I can go and watch Harlem. I can rewatch Noah's Ark. But yeah, just having that broadness, I think, is great. But also the political thought changes. Political thought changes, and the places where black people are and where they conceive themselves to be in society changes, and that, I think, pushes us directly into what we want out of our superheroes and the people that are meant to represent archetypes or exemplars of us. And as we change and our position changes, we want these images of us to change in reflection to that.
Yeah.
Which is why I think we've seen way more anti-heroes come out now, specifically in comics, because I think there was a time when everything around us was so bad in terms of representation in the news, and I'm even drawing in the real media here that reports on real life.
It's relevant.
Exactly. And this is why I was thinking this the other day, that for black people, and for anybody who is marginalized, the news is also a type of media. It's also something that needs extreme critique, because it can be just as biased and unbalanced and fictional as the things that we consume for their fiction.
Just on that point, I always do trip up against the idea of deciding between bad and good, particularly in conversations about representation. Though I do relate to that and I want to do it. But I remember being reminded by, I don't even know who it is, but a while back, that always ask first what it's doing. Why is this happening? What is it doing? And why does it want to do that? And those are the questions that
Yeah.
I approach representations of blackness in media and these science fiction and fantasy media. You can like glean a lot of really fruitful things just from that process.
I totally hear you. And that's really interesting, because as you said that to me, I was like, it's inherently sort of reductive, I think, like good representation versus bad representation. And really, I try to talk about things like you said, in what they do.
Yeah.
What's the impact of this? Instead of saying it's good or bad, just say, is this a reflection of stereotypes? Is it not? Is it this? Is it that? Because also, I think that
I just think we have to take account of the fact that a lot of our legacy characters, like Storm, like Black Panther, started out quite bad stereotypes or very stereotypical. We saw Storm for the first time naked in
in
Africa.
Africa, yeah.
Yeah, and Black Panther is the king of Africa, pretty
Well, of
much.
course, and I mean, that's why I said it's tricky to see them as the reflection of stereotypes, because there are so many fucking stereotypes. There's very few things that black people have not been maligned for. So there's very few contexts that you can meet a character in a way that wouldn't align with some sort of stereotypes. But do they fall into the big tropes of black people are closer to the natural world? Yes. Because if anything, black people were always seen as animalistic and brutish. So you see a lot of black characters with powers that are connected to nature. Black Panther's entire motif is an animal, which is the same as Vixen. And then you've got the physical prowess stereotype. This is why sometimes I say that these things are evidence of stereotype, because in my mind, these are the things that white people thought were complimentary to say about black people. Oh, you're big and strong. You don't realize that is a racist screed that is drawn from slavery, when our bodies were commodities to you. And white people have never had trouble seeing the value in black physicality, which is why they'll always support a singer or a runner or a jumper, because the black value is in
the physical.
And it was like that when we were tilling and farming and picking. And now
Hmm.
they just cheer for us to run and jump and throw and score. We're still serving white interests with our bodies in a lot of ways. But, obviously that changes and flexes.
What you're touching on there, just to slightly take a different angle on that, then there's a way we can view these black characters in media as a way of categorizing blackness, especially
Hmm.
if you think about the position of the authors at the time. Before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about Ahura.
I hear everyone's voice calling my name.
And I think I mentioned something about the way in which, if you take Uhura from the original series, played by Nichelle Nichols, as a central text, then Uhura is presented as this idea of black potential. Written by white authors, presented to probably primarily white audience in the showrunner's mind.
Hmm.
That was how Uhura was constructed, an idea of like black potential. Still, that was given the confines of the time and the people involved. That potential was behind a desk just talking to people rather than being part of the actual action. When we saw Star Trek go into its actual mission, Uhura was in space. She was in a more servile coded role, which is interesting, especially when you're attempting a futuristic utopian vision. What that ends up exposing is the limitations between our idealism, especially if you're thinking like within liberalism, and the
Hmm.
confrontations of that with the actual reality of the systems that we are currently in that are purporting to get us there, to get us to that utopia. And in that confrontation, there's a dissonance that's really useful when you want to speak and critique politically
Hmm.
about our structures and our systems.
I totally agree. But I think in there you said our imagination, and I'd just like
Mhm.
to tap on that word
Okay.
because is it ours? And that was the center of the episode that you were talking about from X of Words when we started
Mhm.
here. I did an episode about can a black character really be black if they haven't ever had a black writer? And here, imagination is, I think, the exact right word because
Mhm.
if a man in the 70s is imagining the potential of women in a far flung future, can that really be divorced from the misogynistic framing that you've received about women?
Mhm.
Is it the same? Is it a man's imagination of a woman in a
Mhm.
different context? And that's why when you say like the imagination, I'm like, yes, true, but whose imagination is it?
That's a really great point. I think there is a couple of things that maybe I'm talking about differently here, but I'm not actually
Hmm.
expressing, because there's this idea of like, or at least my idea of a public imagination, almost a shared consciousness in the
Yeah,
culture,
yeah,
the things that we all have access to that people are talking about all the time. But there's also specific black culture, black cultural
yeah.
imagination, where based on your orientation and subjectivity as a person, you are more likely to like understand and interpret things in a specific way. But speaking of
Yeah.
imagination, I do think that there is an active role of the reader in interpreting text. I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
that kind of
100%.
changes it in a way. So I think that a black reader reading a black character written by a white author, I think there is an active act in how they interpret them that by extension allows them to claim them and identify with them despite that hitch.
I totally see you. And also, like, all of this is,
Mm,
I think of it like a shattered mirror. It's the same image, but everybody's seeing a different facet of it from a different perspective. It looks different
mm,
or distorted or bigger and smaller, depending on how you're reading it. I hear you talk about a shared consciousness, and I think there is, but only in the loosest sense of the word, in that I
sure.
think the shared consciousness is a tree that has a shared stem, but there are 1,000 interpretations that
Yeah,
run
yeah.
from that shared stem. And when I read a comment today on Reddit about how someone was scared that they'd been reading Judge Dredd all wrong because they thought Judge
Oh
Dredd
my god, I saw that.
was the
A
hero.
hero.
Yeah, and the follow up comment where someone was like, "Yeah, I always thought that the Empire. I was watching Star Wars and I was an Empire guy through and through." And you see that and you realize that for example, and I know, we speak quite readily about whiteness, but I'm going to do it again. Um, for example, straight white men who are taught to venerate legal law systems because those systems have always been used to protect, enshrine, and empower them, as completely separate to queer people or black people who have lived experience, historical experience of how the law is used to disenfranchise them and subjugate them, will have completely different interpretations of a central figure like the empire. One will see them as a necessary, and I think it's always really interesting to watch how people who are from these empowered groups speak about power figures and what they represent to them. Because he said that he'd always believed and always been taught that law and establishment was an island in a sea of chaos on which society could be built. And I thought that was really, really powerfully evocative language.
It's so idealistic as well.
It is, but if the dog has never bitten you, of course it's a great guard dog.
It's a
And
great idea. It's a great idea if it worked.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, it's the duality of man, but in structures. It's like a baseball bat. If you've only ever used it for play, then it's a signal of play. If it's only ever been used to hit you over the head, then it's a sign of violence. And two people are looking at exactly the same object with wildly different lenses. And I think even within blackness, you get that. Because when I was talking to Michael in the episode, Michael basically told me that being a black fan meant that in order to enjoy the media that he was reading, he had to accept a certain level of distaste, disregard. He had to learn to look the way. He had to learn to look the other way in a lot of different things,
Right. So alienation was a
And
key feature of like how he was relating to it.
not even alienation, just like acceptance of gross misrepresentation or harm. And for him, and we'd gone two different ways. Like, we were both met with black characters that were super superficial or super stereotypical and basically integrated or embodied these stereotypes we were trying to get away from in real life. And some of us, like me, went, this is bullshit, and put the books down. And other people went, let me just draw out the positives of this,
Right.
And so that's why I think that also we've come a great way in terms of representation, because it's not so either or anymore. Like, I can pick up and put down loads of different things. I was watching Queen Sugar, and Queen Sugar is one of the best shows I've ever fucking seen. If you haven't watched Queen Sugar,
Beautiful show.
Go. And that is like black humanity in all of its rawest senses. Like, them people wanted me dead because I was going through it, bitch, every single episode. But shows like that, and then you juxtapose it.
And she was
like,
dating a cop, and my heart broke.
Oh!
I was like, no, I was ready to cast you a storm queen. What are you doing?
Oh, it wasn't even that. That wasn't even my thing. Everything to do with Blue. Oh my God. If Blue came on the screen.
Yeah.
If Blue came on the screen, I was ready to go. I was on the edge. Yeah, the tears were welling up. The nose was dripping. If he went,
you were giving it all Viola Davis. Like,
child, like, just, do you know when she's looking in the mirror, she takes the wig off? Not like this.
Why is your penis on a dead girl's phone?
And also, the thing that I love about it is that I don't think black media is trying to be or needs to be as general or widely relatable as it did before. Because, all right, so say if we go back 10 years and we look at the shows that we had on, we've got what was it called? The Cosbys.
Yeah, the Cosby Show.
Right? We've got Will Smith, Fresh Prince
of Bel-Air.
We've got Living Single. We've got Girlfriends. Now, I would split.
Sorry, I just love that.
Not you trying to soft launch a music career.
I ain't got a soft launch, bitch. I could book any stage in any room.
Good luck with that stage you speak of.
Not me being the Ciara of the situation. Not my goodies. Oh no. Well, at least I'll get wrestled at the end of it. That's fine.
Oh, Yeah, so okay, so I could categorize those two shows in different ways. Like I feel like half of it is about being deeply, deeply relatable. Girlfriends,
Hmm.
living single, they had one of every type of black person.
Okay.
You know, they were trying to relate. You got the classy one, you got the hippie one, you got the job obsessed one, you got the man
Hmm.
obsessed one, you got the this, you got the one with it, you got the single mother, you got. It was
Yeah,
trying to be relatable to every. It was trying to gather as many
they're
black people as
tropes.
it
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, wide net.
I think it was because we had such scant black media that they wanted it to speak to loads of black people.
And we had limited space in media as well, in that like we didn't get the spot. We
Exactly.
had one spot.
Yeah. So if you want a show to work, you can't be hyper specific about the type of black people that it speaks to.
Hmm.
Because as soon as they see four black women on the fucking poster, 98% of white people ain't watching it. And there are a lot of really interesting studies about how white people do not watch films, TV shows that have entirely or even majority black casts because they do
Hmm.
not think, quote unquote, it is for them.
Yeah.
So if you know that chances are you're aiming for a black show and you've got one fucking shot at this and it needs to be a rating success, you need to try to speak to as much of the black population as you can to get those ratings up. Whereas now, I think with the rise of social media, which democratized access, it democratized support in a way that took it out of sort of traditional metrics building. So I did a lot of social media strategy and social media management back in the day.
Hmm.
And there's also a massive part about how racism and inequality changed access to media, to the mediums or the technology that we use to consume media. So TV shows, if you've got, well, loose example, I'm making all of this fucking up, but I'm telling you the trace of things that I saw with bullshit sort of facts and figures. But say 20 years ago, a TV was way more expensive than it was because it was a huge luxury item. And we knew that a lot of black people were working class and couldn't afford those luxury items. So maybe didn't have a color TV or didn't have the access to do this or were catching things on other people's TVs or watching this or didn't know about them at all. And if we're judging the success of what works and what doesn't based on an already skewed population of TV watchers, when not everybody has equal access to a TV, you've already got a skewed population. So the white show that speaks to rich white people is going to be way more of a ratings hit because more rich white people have TVs.
Hmm.
And so the rise of the internet democratized a lot of that in a really powerful way.
But like
And
that's not all good. In that if everybody gets a voice, it means that the voices that you don't want to hear are also as loud as the voices that you do. Right?
100%. Access meant access for everybody. So even
Hmm.
though people had access to a platform, the quality of what you would hear on any given platform sometimes dropped down. Now I say
Yeah.
quality in terms of like, and this is what we're facing now, like this big boom in misinformation because there are no checks. At least
Hmm.
like 60 years ago, if you had a news show on, there was at least the expectation of some level of journalistic integrity in the facts and figures. I mean, there was a lot of shit that was skewed and bullshit because, you know, fuck it,
Hmm.
they weren't going to do a fucking civil rights march justice. And so that's why, like, that's what I fucking forgot. The points of good and bad. And I think one of the unique things that I've always held as a black fan and as a black person generally in life is this really interesting relationship to the concepts of good and bad.
Right.
As sitting in a group, and you'll know this, but sitting in a group that is often and has historically always been labeled as bad unduly meant that I grew up, I didn't have the privilege of learning this really simple dichotomy because from my early days, my parents were saying to me, I know that they've labeled everything evil, dark, corrupting as black,
Right.
and they've also labeled you as black, but you are good.
Yeah. There's a dissonance there. Yeah.
Not even a dissonance, but just understanding that being told something is bad is not the end of it. These concepts need interrogation. From my earliest concept of self, it was an interrogation of the labeling of bad.
I've never heard anyone else express that. Just trying to come to terms with the way in which the word black is understood, specifically in relation to white. I was just reading Stockley Carmichael's Black Power speech just because it was quoted in something. And Stockley Carmichael was an organizer and coined pretty much the term Black Power. And that reverberated towards the
We're never
60s
gonna
and
get caught up in
70s.
questions about power. This country knows what power is, knows it very well, and it knows what black power is because it deprived black people of it for 400 years. So it knows what black power is. But the question of why do white people in this country associate black power with violence? And the question is because of their own inability to deal with blackness. If we had said Negro power, nobody would get scared. Everybody would support it. If we said power for colored people, everybody'd be for that. But it is the word black. It is the word black that bothers people in this country, and that's their problem, not mine. Their problem.
And I was thinking about the idea of black power within that confines. And part of his speech, he was talking quite a bit about the way in which we have been taught to believe that everything that is termed or associated with black is bad, but black is beautiful, black is good, black is power.
Anything all black is bad. Minor premise or particular premise. I am all black. Therefore. I'm never going to be putting that trick back. I am all black and I'm all good.
So interesting reading that speech. Everything he was saying felt so familiar about the co-option of words away from black people, the position of the white liberal. It was edifying. It was just really illuminating. We have not moved a step forward. Instead, we got access to a bunch of different people's voices that just showed us how far back we all still are and how far we still have to pull. Well, actually, I don't even know. I'm abdicating that responsibility. I don't want to pull anyone into a realm of awareness. I'm done with that. I feel like you have the world at your hand. You can find it out.
And I think that takes it takes me back, interestingly, to like the superhero of it all, because your thing was about black empowerment. And as I read through the notes that you sent me, that were very extensive.
Don't drag me. Don't drag me. Don't come for me. Mama gave you references. She gave you quotes.
She is a PhD girl through and through.
Don't forget it. It's on the wall. Look it up. Look up, bitch. She's here. She's a doctor.
Well, what I was going to say, I think there's like an idea brewing in my mind. So yeah, as I grew up from my earliest days, there was always this duality of understanding that what was called bad was not always bad. And there was definitely a very fine line. You could be called bad for things that were not bad. So as I grew up and started to chafe against some of the more heteronormative things that were happening within the black community that I was part of, and I realized that I was but for not liking women in the way that I should. And so my whole life as a black, queer, neurodivergent person, I say neurodivergent, I've got ADHD, I've lived a life where parts of me, inherent parts of me, have always been labeled bad. My blackness made me more likely to be bad. My queerness made me a pervert or a sexual deviant or a sissy or a faggot or weak or a coward or this or that. My ADHD made me unreliable and inconsistent and impulsive and sensitive and da-da-da-da-da. So my whole life has been a reconciliation of that line. So your questions made me think, what is the function of superheroes? What is the function of these people that we create and imagine? And sometimes they are meant to show the best parts of us. Sometimes they're meant to show the worst parts of us. They show how far we can fall. They show cautionary tales of what we're capable of. And they show what we imagine ourselves to be capable of. So that, I think, nicely ties us back to the imagination thing, because when a lot of black heroes have been created by white people, they're not actually what black people think they're capable of. They're what white people think black people are capable of, which can be tailored and colored and tinted with a lot of other things. But then I was like, okay, taking it outside of that realm, and what do black superheroes mean to me? I mean, I can't speak for blackness as a whole, but to me, I wanted them to empower me in a way that they couldn't. As a 7-year-old, I probably had more nuance about good and bad being very circumstantial, situational terms than a 9-year-old, for example, who has none of those barriers, and the jacket fits them great. So they get told there's good and bad, and they just happen conveniently to be good. And so that is a dichotomy that never chafes them. They never have to see any nuance in it, because it isn't expressed with nuance, and it doesn't present in their life with nuance. There is good and they are bad, and they are good and they are separated from all the things that are bad, while all the media and the news and the televisions, and I think there's also explicit messaging, but then implicit messaging. Like, for example, you don't have to tell me that apples are a shitty fruit. You just never have to sell apples anymore. Just don't sell apples. And so when people are like, oh, why is representation important? I go, because there's power in a mission. There's tacit
Yeah.
messages in a mission. And if white people are walking through a world where they are the only faces anywhere and they never see anyone else, it's very easy to just environmentally soak up this idea that they're not important. Because if they were, they'd be here. You align that with this idea that a lot of people think the world is a clean meritocracy. It's not. You've headlocked the world so that you don't have to experience any sort of challenge or discrimination. The rest of us is very much not. But if you overlay this idea, this sort of faux idea of meritocracy, with the clear and present lack of anybody but you, it's easy to come to, well, we wouldn't be here unless we were the best. We wouldn't be everywhere unless we were the most interesting or the most relatable or the most gregarious or the most this. And that's something that I had to unlearn in my life. So then when I sat down and I opened up these comic books and I see black superheroes, I wanted them to be a representation of what I thought I was capable of. And I wanted to see myself in all my messiness brought to the page. I wanted to see liberation themes. I wanted to see black people do things that I wasn't empowered to do in my own life. I wanted to see black queer people stand up for their identities and push back against heteronormativity within blackness. I wanted to see black heroes that pushed against the confines and the chafes of white ideas and limitations and violence and stereotypes. And what I got very much respectability on the page. This is what white people think makes us good.
Right.
And so that's what pulled me away from the medium, because I started reading Icon at first. But in X-Men, and this is why I think I was drawn to X-Men so much, because they were, in many cases, anti-respectability. Their bodies were different.
Right.
There was no way they could hide or pretend. And that's why I've never been, to this day, I have never been an Original 5 reader.
Right. Don't. It's bad.
I just don't care. You can see, like, to me, there's a marked political shift. It's not great, but it's significant, where you suddenly have a team of a German Catholic, a Russian farm boy, an African goddess. Exactly. Yeah. It leans so hard into the idea that mutantum was about variation and difference, instead of these 5 white kids who just happen to be special. And because you can sum up 90% of media with the sentence in which a white person discovers they are special. And so the O5 really, but the new team did, and that's where I really started to get into it. So I wanted my black heroes to be nuanced, and now I feel like I can get that. And it takes us back to the black mediocrity point, really. And like I said, I think mediocrity here is a misnomer, because what I want to see is black nuance. I want to see black complexity. And that's why it allowed me, now that I'm sitting in this new cultural landscape where I can access black complexity, when I see characters like Black Manta in Aquaman, it's fine. Because they represent just one facet of a diamond that has loads of facets now. They're not the only page in the book.
Right.
So to me, Black Manta sits, as one of hundreds of rolling pages about blackness that I can access. And that is a valuable part of the black complexity. You need black antagonists. You need mad black people. You need black people who hate everyone. You need black people who are getting everything wrong as part of that story of black complexity. And that's where I think we've made the most strides, because when I was young and growing up, we didn't have black complexity, and now we do. And for me, it makes me much more receptive of and graceful towards stories that maybe are stereotypical or show black people in a particularly harsh light or
I'm with you on all of that. What that made me think of is that there are now a lot more black authors. There's more black authorship writing black characters, which is great. But I am wondering is that they are writing these characters under these corporate giants for the most part, right? And so that necessitates usually is that they're mediating with these corporations in a way. So I'm interested in your perspective about how do you think that black authors are orienting their participation amongst these cultural giants towards unexpected aims? And me asking this question, I'm thinking I was just watching this new show that premiered, which is more of a horror, The Other Black Girl. Have you heard of it?
I wanted to watch that. I was going to watch The Changeling tonight. I was going to start watching The Changeling tonight.
That's the other one also I was thinking of. But yeah, no, I was watching that one, and that is a story about 2 black women working at a publishing agency and playing the game to try and get ahead of each other or to try and mediate around each other. And so that is the perspective that is inserted in by having Black authorship, it's adding a dimension to a story that we're often quite aware of and we're quite familiar with. But I'm wondering, like, well, what are the trends that you're seeing developing in the way in which Black authors are negotiating with these institutions that they're working for and getting paid by for the work that they're doing?
Okay, so my sense of it is that it is difficult. But
Hmm.
firstly, it's always been difficult. And secondly, I think we're in an interesting time now because I think we're in the tail end of what I would call the George Floyd corporate era, where anti blackness and the way that corporations interact with blackness in terms of individual blackness, in terms of black culture, in terms of commodifying blackness, they're very aware of it in a way that corporations have never been aware of it historically. So, do I think it's very difficult? Yes. Do I think that for the time being, at least, because we know that memories are very, very short, and
Mm.
people very quickly get exhausted of having to see the humanity and consider the personhood of people that they've never had to do that for
Yeah,
before.
it
Um,
is tiring.
it is, and
Apparently, yeah, no, it
especially,
is.
well, I mean, if you lived in a world where you never ever had to learn about anybody else, and then suddenly you did,
Mm.
you know that really cool quote where it says like, "If you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression."
Yeah,
If you're accustomed to solipsism, awareness feels like effort.
empathy's impossible for a solipsist.
Yeah,
Yeah, I get
yeah,
that.
yeah. Because you don't
Mm.
exist. If somebody's grown up only ever seeing people like them.
Now, let me
Oh,
just
sorry.
hold you to a point you were saying just for a second. You were talking
Okay.
about we're in a post George Floyd era in representation, which I think is really insightful because we did have that sudden flurry of pressure and people for once for the first time in our history it felt like, oh, there is something that we have to talk about, and the
Yeah.
majority of people agreed, or at least a large proportion of people, and the conversation was shifting that way. We have passed that now. That has had some ramifications, not ramifications, but influences on the culture and on the media that we've had in the culture. We've had more Black stories than ever being
Yeah.
funded, produced. We've
Yep.
had more Black talent being spotlighted on magazines, on television
Yeah.
shows, all that stuff. And that's been great.
Yeah.
But now, like you're saying, we're reaching that plateau moment. As someone who, in your day job, you work with EDI, don't you? So, like, what would be your
Mhm.
prediction? Where are we going next if you had to predict? Regressive? Are
Um,
we going back?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we are. So I would say for a while, and this was sad because it's, you were talking about us not coming anywhere. We're
Yeah.
doing all these things just to show how little we've moved.
Mm.
George Floyd was a lynching. That's the only reason people cared. They
Yeah.
watched a black man get killed live in front of them. And that used to be done for sport. That used to be done for entertainment. And it's
Mm.
sad that there had to be a lynching for people, for there to usher in a let's give a shit about black people's experience zeitgeist. And that's what it is. It's a
Yeah.
zeitgeist.
Yeah.
It's not a fundamental movement because, like I said, solipsism is hard to unravel. And I
Mm.
also don't think that this is something that just one marginalized group will be able to do alone. I don't think that disabled people will be able to fundamentally change society, its ways or its movements in the same way. I think that there was a really interesting power in the overlap of COVID and the Black Lives Matter
Mm.
movement. And I think the reason that both of those were managed to get so much momentum was because they were both challenging the
The
status
status
quo
quo.
in different ways at the same time.
Mm.
And that was very powerful. But what I think regression is going to happen in the same way that regression always happened. But yeah, I do think you're right. Like we got so many things greenlit. Like I don't know whether Miles Morales would have had his own film like that had people not been able to lean on the cultural zeitgeist of this is the time for black stories.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm so aware, and it's really like a poison chalice type situation because as much as I know that I love the black complexity that I get now, I do know it's paid for in blood,
Mm.
and I wish we weren't. I wish we weren't a society that had to watch somebody die to briefly engage with their humanity
Yeah.
because we've been talking about this forever. It's not like this is a new conversation. It's just the people who'd learned to tune us out needed to watch somebody die on camera to give a shit for a bit. And that is very,
Yeah.
very depressing. And I think that level of entrenched shit is a boulder that we managed to shift a little bit for a while, but it's going to roll back. There's a dent in the
Yeah.
floor where it was. I spoke earlier briefly about like nuance, about this idea of good and bad. And I love that we are where we are now. If anything is going to lead to a sustenance or a sort of sustained period of this, it is the richness of the stories that we've managed to give. as much as I think there will be a swing back, I also think that, okay, so you're standing in front of the door, you hit it open, the door swings quite wide, but then it has to come back and fall on your hand. I think that's what's going to happen. We've pushed the door open, it's swung open for a bit, and then it's coming back, but eventually it will meet our hand. And when the door wasn't there, we managed to get our hand forward. So when it comes back, when it comes back to rest, it will probably rest a little bit further than it was. But I am glad we have the complexity that door push created, because now I think you can actually get the realistic and what I think is the best position for blackness in terms of superheroes, but also in wider media.
Yeah.
I think as a people that have a legacy of being painted as bad in undue or unfair ways, you could never capture proper black complexity through that rigid dichotomy of good and bad. Because black people are both of those things at the same time sometimes. Sometimes they're none of those things, or sometimes they're one when they're really trying to be the other. So I don't think you can actually get proper good stories with that dichotomy. So I love that you called that out, and you were like, you think that's a reductive view. And I think it's a completely reductive lens. And I think in some people, it becomes more of a reductive lens. I think with everybody it's reductive because no one is just good or just bad. But especially for a people that have always been politicized on that line, the idea of goodness and badness becomes really interesting. It's not until you start to mix it up and blur it that you can really start to tell the real, authentic black stories.
Yeah. I kind of almost want to tie it up there because I think that was really lovely. I do want to get your response to one more thing, though, and then I'll let you go. So Malcolm Spellman, I think that is the first quote I put in.
Blackness is a concentrated version of the great human struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really would like to get your reaction to that statement. So that is the showrunner for Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show. Okay, so let me just say how I felt. I kind of rebuffed that almost instantly because I feel like there's something essentializing about the framing of it.
Yeah, 100%.
And I also think that it ascribes pain to blackness in a way that I don't like. Yeah, I kind of just wanted to get your response to it. I mean, especially now as a person who I think you watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which if you did, God help you.
I was about to say, it's a very broad quote. That's like, blackness is a concentrated version of the great human struggle. And then you gave us a deflated quarter pounder with cheese. So do you even understand what you're talking about here?
God, that show. I cannot believe that somehow Secret Invasion... Was Secret Invasion worse? I don't know if it's worse or better. It was more boring.
Is it... Okay, so...
they made another black woman green.
Oh yeah, because you know what? If there's one area where people have never struggled to find black actors, it's when you need a monster or an alien or someone to be so different and weird. Like, do you know how pissed off I was when in Avatar, all of the Na'vi were black people? I was like, so hold on, people are going through 3 hours of hair and makeup, but you still needed niggas because they're aliens. It was like, they're meant to be weird. They're meant to be weird savages who live in the trees. Let's hire a...
Did you see in the sequel, they apparently hired white people and just gave them dreadlocks and blue skin, but they're still black coded them. I was like, oh my goodness.
I was
James
like, look,
Cameron, you monster.
keep that mess for you lot. But anyway, let's leave them alone. Well, Malcolm Spellman, I will give Malcolm Spellman some grace in that I think it's impossible to tell a revolutionary story through a global multinational. And this is the limitation of superheroes, I think. And we spoke way ago about the rise of the anti-hero. And I think the rise of the anti-hero and the rise of the compassionate or justified villain is exactly what superheroes need, because that dichotomy of good and bad erases and reduces certain stories. You cannot do this. And in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they try to play with some ideas, but ultimately they try to stick to this idea that America and its systems and the way things are is good, and wanting to change it is bad. And there's no nuance there. So, the girl who leads the rebel group in Winter and the Falcons, who had a fucking point. They had a fucking point. And Marvel loves to flirt with an antagonist who has a point.
Yeah.
So, in Black Panther,
Killmonger
had a point. Killmonger had a motherfucking point. So did our good sis in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So did Namor to a point.
Yeah.
But then they always do one thing, and then the whole film does a baby in the bathwater fallacy of going, oh, all that amazing legitimate stuff they said now doesn't matter because they murdered 4 Americans. And I'd be like,
Yeah.
yes, that is unfortunate, and you should definitely hold consequences to that. But I do think some things have been brought to the table that we should think about.
Yeah, it's misconstruing what radicalism is. It's reading radicalism as terrorism and it's parroting the points of truly progressive,
Yeah.
truly thought provoking. They're using the language of liberation politics, but then it's conflating it with terrorism and terrorist activities. I think that's what's happening is a misuse of liberation language to.
I think it's a really it's shit liberation media. It's really
Mhm.
really incisive and representative liberal media
Yeah.
because all of those shows are undercut by the idea that liberation should come without anybody's discomfort and that
Mhm.
niceness, and it's basically the idea that you should try to change things and make things better, but nobody should ever be uncomfortable
Yeah.
or hurt or removed. And the fact of the matter is the people who are in power and the systems that we have were specifically built to empower certain people and keep them empowered. We are not changing shit unless somebody falls off that fucking chair.
Mm.
There is no kumbaya path to liberalism. And I don't think black people, I don't think queer people, I don't think disabled people who have demonstrable lived experiences and histories that show that that is not a possibility have the privilege of believing that real change can be done while everybody is comfortable.
Right.
Because only those people who are comfortable and will be comfortable anyway will
Mm.
prioritize their comfort in that
Yeah.
way. And so here, Malcolm Spellman to me, I agree with you. Blackness is a concentrated version of the great human struggle. I think is wildly reductive.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not.
Mm.
Black people's interaction with whiteness can be indicative of a microcosm of the great human struggle. But to do that
Mhm.
ties our identity, it makes our identity relational in a way that I don't like. There are untold, unspeakable levels of joy and passion and silliness and irreverence and confusion within blackness that is boiled down, I think, into this idea of like a concentrated version of the great human struggle. I don't think we're any tell a lie. I do think we are more representative of the great human struggle than other groups,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't use that as our defining feature here. But
Yeah.
obviously, this is an interview. Maybe it was brief. Da 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 da.
And
But
it's like you said, it is reductive because at the same time you have to question how is he using the word blackness. I get a sense he's talking about Black Americans. I am
yeah,
not Black American. I'm Black, but I'm not American. And so are you. You are Black, but you're not American. But I think that adds just to double back to an early conversation that we were talking about when we were talking about perspectives.
mm,
That complicates things because a perspective you could bring into it, for example, is that of well, a lot of these stories, a lot of the critiques of these stories often relate the representation of these black symbols, let's say, to the history of black people in the United States. That is not
yes,
the history of my ancestry, so I bring a very different understanding of what a black struggle, my specific black struggle is as an immigrant, as a person who dealt with anti-blackness in a different context.
yes. Do I think it's reductive? I think it's reductive for us? Yes, but Malcolm
Mm,
Spellman, as a Black American, maybe that's not reductive for him. And I think that
yeah.
again, this takes me back to the fractured mirror thing. I am Black
Mm,
British. Black British does not have the same cultural weight as Black American. Black American, I
mm,
think, is a fully developed, realized aspect or facet or subculture of blackness. Whereas Black British doesn't have the same weight. In fact, a lot of the Black Britons that I know, we are more culturally close to our countries or continents of origin
mm,
than we are. I think Black Americanness is so ingrained, and specifically because a lot of people are divorced from their heritages in a way that they can't go, oh, I'm Igbo,
yeah.
or oh, yeah, I'm this,
Mm,
I'm that. So they don't have the same cultural availability. They have
mm,
created a culture within themselves. So for Malcolm Spellman talking about blackness as maybe he can, and bearing in mind this is all very circumstantial, we don't know Malcolm personally, but
right.
talking about blackness in this way might be representative for him, because the Black American experience is more of a microcosm of the great human struggle. Whereas me, who grew up with Jamaican grandparents, with Bayesian grandparents, and I've got food and culture and loss and this and that and crop over here and festival here, da 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 da, that isn't to me necessarily. So as much as we're calling it reductive, I think that is reductive for us through that that broken mirror paradigm. But then also, you were talking about power. And I think that there's always been limitations on superpowers, superpowered people. Because I was thinking, who's truly free? You were talking about freedom and agency. And I was like, what superhero has true agency? And I couldn't think of one. Superman is one of the most empowered, but has chained himself to a very, very specific ideology that rules what he does and does not do. Batman is limited by and constrained and contained by his trauma and his background. Wonder Woman, ethics, this, that. There's always something that stops them. And I made a tweet the other day that I think is really pertinent here, where in the white imagination, power is corruption. Because liking the power too much is how you get to Nazism. Liking the fact that you are on top of the pyramid means that you subjugate and oppress others. And I think that has never been an idea of what power is from other groups. I think we've got a vision of empowered fantasy people from empowered real people. And they are trying to import the sort of ethics of having privilege, of going, you need a moral code. You cannot wield your power brutally against other people. And I think that's a general message that applies to everybody, because all of us are privileged in some aspect. But I do think that if you take that paradigm to other people and other experiences, and you go, what does real free power mean to you? You'd get way more answers than subjugation.
And you'd get way more responses than repudiation or transformation.
Yes. Like, what if Superman was disabled and trans, what would you do to the world? How would you change the world?
Yeah. Oh God. Oh, I want that now. Someone write that, please. I love that. Okay. Welcome back to Citation Corner. So this is usually where I'd be responding to your comments or answering your questions, but this is episode 1, so the inbox is empty. Feel free to send in a letter or a voice clip to Kaladin with 3 N's at gmail.com. That is KHALIDENNN@gmail.com. You can find Ash at Van the First and his podcast at X of Words on all the socials. You can find me at Also Perp. All of that will also be in the show notes, so just scroll down. The goal is to do these monthly for a 10-episode season. Episode 2 is in the shop. In the meantime, there is another full episode in your feed for you to check out. It's actually the first episode I recorded when I had the idea to do this. We're calling it The Lost Pilot. Let me know what you think. Oh, and please leave a good rating and review. Positive encouragement is encouraged. Okay. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.